Thank you very much.
Thanks, Malcolm. Thanks, and hi, everyone. I wonder if I could just start by asking how many people in the room are actually pension fund trustees, principal officers, or first that. Wow. Okay. Cool. And then advisors to pension funds. Okay. All right. That's really great because actually I think all of us doing this work have had many experiences where we've had trustee events and had no trustees in the room. So it's really nice to see that many people here. I mean, of course, the message is important for a much broader group than just trustees, but I think the key message, and this was the message of the Institute for Retirement Funds conference on Speak Up. Oh goodness. Okay. On Monday and Tuesday, which is that you have the power, and I guess we have to really start working to get out of what's John, it's you who calls it the circle of death, where everybody blames everybody else for not doing anything, and nothing happens. So we've heard a lot of stuff today about the immense investment risks that climate change poses. Also the huge investment opportunities that exist in the transition to a low carbon economy. We've heard a lot about the fact that it's a crisis, the fact that it's urgent, and the fact that we need a massive reallocation of capital in order to tackle this crisis. What we also know, of course, and this has come up already in the room a couple of times today, is that there's insufficient political will to do what we need to do, and not just in South Africa. And there's a big fight back against what we're trying to do here. And I think one of the most interesting manifestations of that fight back has been the reaction of the government to banks saying that they'll no longer finance new coal, making threats about prescribed assets, sending the market into a big spin. Not something we anticipated. Myself, my organization, and lots of other civil society organizations have been really behind that push for the banks to stop financing coal. I don't think any of us anticipated quite how much that would be resented in various sectors of society. There are also lots of myths and misperceptions about fiduciary duty in South Africa and around the world. The reason why organizations like the PRI have done so much work to try and dispel those myths. Mostly those myths are to do with the idea that we have to maximize returns at all costs, which is particularly ironic in a pension fund context, because maximizing returns at all costs in terms of what we're talking about now means ensuring that your beneficiaries will retire into a world which is absolutely disastrous and full of social, economic, and environmental upheaval. So there's a constant refrain, and I was asked this 3 or 4 times at this pension fund conference last week. South Africa has so many problems. Why should we focus on climate change? We have to start understanding that climate change is going to exacerbate all of those problems, going to make them much, much worse. So it's not a separate issue. It's integral to all of the problems that we're dealing with. So what, as part of our kind of advocacy work to try and drive this a better understanding of fiduciary duty when it comes to climate risk, Just Share collaborated with an international environmental legal NGO called Client Earth, and we commissioned a legal opinion from Faskin, Rosemary Hunter, who's one of South Africa's top pension fund lawyers, to specifically ask the question, are the boards of pension or provident funds required under South African law to take into account climate-related risks and opportunities when making investment-related decisions on behalf of their funds? The legal opinion was unequivocal that the answer to this question is yes. Many people would say, well, that was obvious because Regulation 28 says that you have to consider ESG risks when you're making your investment decisions. But believe me, it's not obvious to many people. So I just spent a little bit of time on the law. I don't want to get into too much detail. If you're really interested, you can read the legal opinion. I would recommend you read the summary. But if you are a lawyer and you want to know the details, then there are a lot of details in the 55-page legal opinion. But some of the key points are that the trustees of a fund owe their fiduciary duties to the fund, which is a legal entity. So while the Pension Funds Act does say that a fiduciary duty is to members and beneficiaries in respect of accrued benefits, this must be understood in the context of the fund as a whole. So a pension fund is not just established for the benefit of its current members, it's a long-term vehicle intended to provide benefits to future members and their dependents too. And that's what distinguishes pension funds from other financial institutions, is that long-term focus, that fiduciary duty in many respects. You're kind of holding the future of beneficiaries who won't claim their benefits for decades to come in your hands. And trustees aren't entitled to act on mandates from those who appointed or elected them. This is another big misperception in South Africa. They must exercise independent discretion. So what is a fiduciary duty to a fund? It's a duty of loyalty, a duty to protect the interests of the principal, in other words, the fund, and the interests of the principal are the fulfillment of its objects. What are the objects of a pension fund? It's a special purpose, not-for-profit savings vehicle for collective economic empowerment and risk sharing. It's an occupational fund, and it's, again, to say not just about the current members and what their views and perceptions and beliefs might be, but it's important to think about future members and to manage the fund in a way that's resilient and sustainable over the long term. Another important thing about pension funds, which is not talked about very often, is that because there is a special tax treatment of pension funds, they're actually a form of state-subsidized social security. So it's in the interest of the state as a whole that pension funds are managed in a way that looks to sustainable future returns. Okay, so again, don't want to, okay, I'll say it again. Climate change is a material financial risk to your investments. I've heard this many times today. You'll hear it many times more. And that really is the key point, right? This is not, we're not saying, if you're a nice person, you should be thinking about this. If you have children, you should care about climate change. Those are all important things. But the bottom line is that from a purely financial point of view, climate risk poses serious material risks. Okay, and if those risks are not factored in, they're going to have detrimental returns on your detrimental impacts on your returns. And I'll quickly be a lawyer here. There's always the threat of litigation in the future. This is something that isn't spoken about very much, but that's definitely starting to happen in the States and in Europe. Funds that are losing, who can be demonstrated to have been losing returns or generating low returns because they have failed to sufficiently factor in fossil fuel risk, are subject to claims from their members for damages. So again, we've got all the risk stuff, all the scary risk to your returns issues, but then there's a whole new side of it, and that's the opportunity side, the low carbon opportunities. And I think this is where a lot of people who care about this issue in South Africa stall, because we don't have a lot of low carbon investment opportunities. There's going to be some more talk about that later, and we'll also address Jan's question about whether you are forced to invest in high carbon industries by nature of South Africa's, my favorite phrase, small investment universe. It's not the case, and I'll let more experienced financial experts tell you why. But two important points. The first one being that there's a lot of movement on this front. It's coming. Options for low carbon investment are growing, but we need the demand from the trustee side and from investor side to stimulate the financial industry to generate these products, and not to be scared to, it's seen as such a big risk to invest in a low carbon fund, for example. But no one's thinking about the risks of investing in the high carbon funds that they already hold. Then the second point is about engagement. It's all very well saying, well, I don't like Sasol, but what can I do? It's in the top 40. It's in all the funds. There's nothing. My asset manager says I must be in Sasol. Okay, fine. But is anyone actually talking to? Are you talking to your asset manager about what they're doing in relation to engagement with high carbon entities like Sasol? I mean, Sasol is in the top 100 carbon emitting companies on the planet. In the list of Climate Action 100 companies that the investor initiative that Fiona was talking about is engaging with. But you know, from my experience of the successful engagements in Climate Action 100 Plus has been, you know, a very strong, particular, small, focused group of local investors who have focused on that particular entity. And I'm just not sure that that's happening here. But again, it's the death spiral. You know, the trustees say, well, our asset managers don't talk to us about it. The asset managers say, we're doing a huge amount of this, but we're not getting the support from our clients. You know, it really is time for everyone to step up. And trustees are just in such a powerful and privileged position. You have all these extraordinary legal powers. Regulation 28 in relation to the ESG component is unprecedented in the world. It is an extraordinary piece of legislation, and a huge number of people worked very hard for a very long time to get that piece of legislation in place, but it's just not being used. There is so much power in that statement that says you should consider ESG risks in your investment decision making, but it's just not being utilized nearly enough. So just a practical thing. I mean, we wrote to 50 odd of the biggest pension fund boards across South Africa. We wrote a very careful, detailed letter about why climate risk is a problem, why the fiduciary duties of pension fund trustees are important in terms of addressing climate risk, clear steps that pension fund trustees should take in order to start moving on this. I think we've had about 4 kind of concrete responses. It's been pretty poor. So maybe that's our fault. Maybe we're doing something wrong. But and I think to me the most concerning kind of response has been the people who've written back and said, we have ESG in our investment policy statement. We're already doing this. It's not just about ESG. This is a specific risk. It requires specific action. It requires strong action. It requires fast action. And some of the actions, the steps that we've recommended pension funds should take are, and I'll just go through these quickly because you can access them afterwards. Ensure that you are climate competent. In other words, understand the risks. Assess your carbon footprint. Understand how exposed your particular fund is to this problem. Develop a clear climate policy. Has anyone seen such a thing in South Africa? I mean, it is such a fantastically useful tool. I've put on each table a couple of printouts of the New York Common Retirement Fund's Climate Action Plan for 2019, released last month. It is the most extraordinary document. It sets out in crystal clear, easy to understand terms, what the risks are, what the fund believes it needs to do, the actions it's taken in the past, the actions it's going to take in the future. You don't even have to be an investment professional to write something like this. This is not a difficult step, but what it means is it puts out there who you are, what you believe, and what you expect your service providers to do. And I really think it's important that pension funds start thinking about this and then making them public. That's the other thing that nobody does. Make it public. Maybe you've got one, it's just not public. Nobody knows you've done it. It might as well not exist. So again, communicate the policy. Remember that, yes, asset consultants and asset managers advise you and advise trustees and may be much more familiar with the investment system, but the fiduciary responsibility is yours. Okay, it does not. You're not going to be able to say to a future court, but my asset consultant didn't tell me that this was a problem for my fund. That's not going to be an excuse from a litigation point of view. Okay, the responsibility is yours. Believe me, there will be issues for asset consultants and asset managers too, but for pension fund trustees, the responsibility is yours, and you won't be able to say, "But I didn't know that it was a problem." And then, as Fiona mentioned as well, develop an investment strategy with clear, measurable targets to remove portfolio risk, carbon risk, and leverage low carbon opportunities. Pursue active stewardship and engagement with companies in high carbon sectors, including, and this is very important, by setting clear voting policies and engagement escalation timelines and regularly disclosing to members how you're managing climate risk. We're not seeing any pressure on the directors of high carbon companies in South Africa. There's extraordinary shareholder activism going on overseas where shareholders are threatening to vote entire boards out of office if they don't take strong enough action on climate risk. The whole opinion, should you have a lot of time on your hands, is available there, as well as the letter, a sort of template letter that we wrote to all the pension funds, a very useful fact sheet if you want to share this information with anybody. And just to say that Just Share, as well as numerous other, the PRI, all sorts of other organizations are available to help you if you want to do more on this, okay? There's another document that I put on the table with some simple steps to start drafting a climate change policy, a whole stack of references to really great examples around the world. The most important thing about this is it's not only urgent and essential, but it's actually not that hard. Thanks.